What are we here for? Here, at this place, the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Statesboro. So far in this series, we've examined the following purposes for our being here in this place. It's a place for community. It's a place to respond to the injustices of the world. It's a place where we share our time, our talents, and our treasure. It's a place to celebrate who we are with a special focus on gender and sexuality. It's a place to honor life and death. And today we're exploring how this is a place to simply love one another. As our banner says, love one another. Love is a many-splendored thing. Yes, it is splendid and magnificent and complex and sometimes painful, but oh so necessary. Why do we need love? Why do we need this place to love one another? And how can we do that when we are so different in so many ways? Those are the three questions I want to at least touch on a little bit in this message today. The first, why do we need to love? Well, we as human animals have evolved the capacity and need to love. We can go all the way back to at least our early mammal ancestors when we look at this. Israeli professor of human evolution, Ada Lampert, wrote a book called The Evolution of Love. And if you like science and you want to find out why we are in this, why we have these painful times in love and why we feel like we need love so much, that's a good book to read. I did read that quite a while back, but it still stands with me. And she states this in it. She says, "The placenta and milk are expensive investments that mothers make for the sake of their kids, but they are worth nothing unless they are part of a caring, devoted, alert mother." So it's not just the physical things that evolved that made the difference. You had to have that other stuff with it. It's kind of like Paul says in his letter. You can have this, this, and this, but without love, it doesn't count for anything. To watch the child eat is a joy. You feel joy. To watch it sleep is to dissolve in pleasure. Believe you me. To think of any threat to the little one's well-being gives rise to deep fear. To know that the threat is over brings deep relief. This is the new emotional world of concerned, caring, loving mothers. In the same way that evolution selected things like milk glands, the womb, the birth canal, and so forth, it selected also the urge, the concern, the joy, and the satisfactions that motivate mothers. It was all part of the evolutionary process. The mammalian mothers were the first in evolution to feel concern about others. And they set the cradle for evolution of love to be expanded. The dependence on every individual on proximity. We're dependent on proximity, belonging, and being cuddled occasionally. Yes. I've witnessed all those things. She has one more paragraph I'll get to you. Throughout evolution, love, first as touch, then as a rich cluster of loving behaviors, has become a need and even a prerequisite for physiological and psychological well-being. And that's the end of her quote. So I've been keeping Elena for 2 weeks. And it's been an emotional 2 weeks. But I felt all those things and witnessed and felt firsthand as I was preparing this sermon, I realized how much all of those things, the feelings that go with it, make such a huge difference. So we've evolved these feelings that help our offspring survive. And it's not just women that have evolved them too. And then that carries over then, not only to our offspring, but to other family members. We have the same that we reach out. And even our offspring, perhaps, if we're lucky, caring for us in our old age, maybe. So it began as a survival technique for the family And it continued to expand, it continued into the extended family and then to the tribe to survive. We take care of our own. You've heard people say that. And as a song we sang recently said a couple of weeks ago, we need each other to survive. We need each other to survive. But the world changed. We no longer stay put with our families of origin, or with our tribes, or even our lands of origin. Many of us find ourselves among strangers. Yet we still have those same aspects of our evolution to connect and belong and love that's still within us. We talked about that in the first sermon about community and about our need to come together in community. We need to find a new tribe in new places. Who are our people? And for some of us, Unitarian Universalism is a place where we can call home. This is a place we can call home. And a place for us to find and to give love. So, why do many of us need this place to share love? There are other places we could be. We are attracted to Unitarian Universalism for different reasons. Some come because they want the freedom to seek their own spiritual or religious path. Some come because they are like-minded or open-minded folks here, and they like that folks will welcome them. And others come to be a part of our efforts to improve ourselves and the world. But actually, we are all quite a bit different. I know most of you pretty well. And we are a lot alike in some ways, but we're very different in some ways. It's kind of like a family made up of children from different cultures and backgrounds, all being adopted by a couple when the children are already teenagers. So you think about how that would be, you know? Okay? It makes for some interesting and sometimes difficult situations. So that leads me to that third question. How can we possibly love one another when we are so different in so many ways? I found a true story that I'm going to share with you in the UU World. It's an article by Reverend Victoria Stafford. Now, I could make up some, or I could tell many stories about some of you, but that might not be the thing to do right up here in the pulpit. Sometimes it's better to borrow from another minister, from another situation, another story. And she has a good one. So I'm going to share with you about this to give you an idea about staying in community. Reverend Victoria writes, in the first weeks of my first ministry in an old New England congregation, a woman came to see me. Nearly 90 years old, she was a lifelong member of that church. Her parents had joined in the late 19th century. She didn't like change, she said. She wasn't sure that she liked me, or what she called my point of view. Just remember, she said, I have outlived all of your predecessors, and I will probably outlive you. This woman was a dedicated political conservative in what had become a progressive community. She was a liberal Christian in a congregation that had known gracious eras of theological diversity and also some fits of intolerance. She'd worked for the U.S. State Department through 3 wars and for the American Unitarian Association through the merger with the Universalist Church of America. In this church of her childhood, which she'd never left, most votes at her annual meetings had not gone her way for the last 40 years. She was no stranger to discord. Over 10 years, Victoria said, we cultivated a fierce, respectful love for one another. And what I loved her most was her commitment to that church, no matter what, her fidelity to it, the ferocity with which she paid her pledge each year, no matter how wayward the budget or insufferable, in her words, the sermons. She kept her covenant with that people, with their proud history and the bright promise of their future. and with the free faith tradition that they embodied. I was a young minister then, and her way of being in her relation, her integrity, taught me more about Unitarian Universalism than anything I'd learned in seminary. That's what Victoria said. And I could understand that. You know, we have classes and things like congregational polity, but that's real learning from somebody like this. So, you know, you have to ask yourself, why did this member stick around? Even when many things didn't go her way? Because she was with her tribe. These were her people. And she was living out the promises she made to herself and to them. We say that we as Unitarian Universalists are bound by, not by creed, but by covenant. We're bound by covenant. By the promises we make to one another about how we will be together. When we come into the membership of a Unitarian Universalist congregation, it's kind of like coming into a marriage or coming into a family, a new family. We are making a family or coming into a family, belonging to a family. And since we are very different, we find that we can walk together in our differences if we covenant together, if we make promises of how we will be together. Back in 2007, after 5 years of living with Greg Brock, I agreed to marry him. And when two folks marry, they make a covenant together usually. It's usually called wedding vows. That's a covenant. Now, a covenant is not really like a contract. With a contract, if you break the contract and don't live up to it, then the contract is null and void. But with a covenant, you might mess up, but the bond is too important, and you just keep recommitting to it for as long as you both agree to it. Recommit to it. Unlike some couples who write separate sets of promises, Greg and I decided we would make the same promises to each other on our wedding day. And these were to be just a restatement, really, of what we've been living for the previous 5 years. But since we wanted to say the same thing, we had to find words that we agreed on. Needless to say, our wedding vows were very short. I, Jane Altman Page, take you, Gregory John Brock, to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward in times of joy and sorrow, and to grow with you throughout the seasons of life. May our home be forever filled with peace, joy, and love. Enough said. That's a covenant. That's the Jane and Greg covenant. Covenanting with one another is a very old practice among us as Unitarian Universalists, going all the way back to our early Puritan spiritual ancestry. The leader of the Puritans that were aboard the Arabella, John Winthrop, saw the need for this as they were on the high seas, and this is pretty dangerous, out there. You may recognize his name as, from your history books, he was the first governor of Massachusetts, John Winthrop. Here are his words that he had when he was out on the high seas, on the way here. Now, the only way to avoid shipwreck and to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities for the supply of others' necessities. We must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work, our community as members of the same body. So, shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace? What Winthrop was presenting was sort of a declaration of interdependence. A declaration of interdependence. Now, in her UU World article on covenants, Reverend Stafford stated, those who heard John Winthrop speak would surely have grasped the metaphor of danger. They would have been afraid not only of foundering literally, on New England's rocky shore, but of failing in their errand to establish this commonwealth, their city on a hill. The only way to avoid shipwreck, spiritual or otherwise, was to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, to make and keep a sacred covenant together. Similarly, the early churches of the Standing Order of New England, every one of them made covenants among themselves as congregation and covenants of how they would be in association with each other. And we, as Unitarian Universalists, have continued this tradition. When I was in seminary in the early 2000s, the value of covenanting was reemphasized at our seminary because we were having some problems, and was reemphasized within the UUA. More small groups, large groups, and congregations began to use more formal covenanting. They began to do it more intentionally as they struggled with this, to love one another through their differences and challenges. Some congregations moved to having specific covenants that address how they would be with one another, and they called these relational covenants. How are we going to relate to one another? 10 years ago, I encouraged this congregation to adopt a relational covenant. When I shared my sermon, Can You Say Covenant? Remember those Can You Say sermons back then? Can you say covenant? We surveyed the congregation, had a small group to work to draft something, get feedback, and present the congregation. Then in November 2009, so this was exactly 10 years ago, we voted on it, and there were many who signed it then and there, that this would be our relational covenant. Then last year, we made the decision to recommit to our covenant each Sunday when we had our annual meeting, that we together would recommit, because we'd had a lot of different new people come in and maybe didn't know about this covenanting one to another. And we provide the opportunity also maybe for others to sign it as well. I've printed these. You got them? Find one. You or your neighbor has one. Raise your hand if you need one. Don't have one you can see. Somebody will get one to you. Okay.
Everybody got one.
All righty. I'm going to ask you to stand as you are able and let us read this covenant together. And even if you're not a member, you can covenant with us too, if you would like. This is our congregational affirmation and relational covenant. Are you ready? Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. To this end, we, the people of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Statesboro, affirm the following relational covenants. We warmly welcome all who gather in our community. We honor and support one another as we explore our spiritual paths. We embrace our diversity and grow from sharing our different perspectives. We address our disagreements respectfully, communicating directly with the person or group involved, and see conflict through to a genuine resolution. We serve our fellowship community with generosity and good humor, and we acknowledge and express gratitude for the service of others. We respect our individual boundaries and the boundaries of others. We support one another in love through times of joy and need and struggle. May it be so, and you may be seated. Now, will we always be successful in staying in covenant? Probably not. We may still say something that hurts someone's feelings, or we may not sometimes there may be times when we don't have careful boundaries. But hopefully we will catch ourselves. And if we don't catch ourselves, one of our loving members will gently share with us that we are out of covenant, and we can make amends and begin again in love. So in summary, why do we need to love one another? We've evolved the feelings of love to help one another survive. Why do we come here to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Statesboro to love one another? We're attracted here to help each other for many different reasons. Here we have found our tribe, our people, and we give and receive much needed support and love here. And how do we love one another when we are very different in many ways and we have disagreements? Through covenanting with one another and coming back into covenant to begin again in love when we falter. It's like Rumi's poem, though I've broken my vows 1,000 times, you come back again. Come back again, make amends, begin again in love. Folks, this place, we've proclaimed this a sanctuary. We've proclaimed it a sacred space, a holy space. And we can bring our whole selves, our head, our hearts, and our hands, and sometimes even our dancing feet to this place to love one another. For as that song says, when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place. May it be so.